So we are doing the whole exome sequencing and we're doing the genetics over here. I think it'll be really important because we are into precision, predictive, personalized health. How would I use, and I know the clock genes, I know there's spur, cry, and you've got the deck, but how would I use these things on an individual level to do some of the things that you're talking about, and would I be able to?
Yeah, it's too early for that because the point is, whenever these genes are mutated, even in humans, then there are multiple effects. So, for example, the first one that was cloned was a mutation in period gene, and this gene is core part of the clock. This gene is conserved from fruit flies to mice, humans, everywhere. And the mice that had, the humans that had the mutations, the specific mutation, it's called familial advanced sleep phase syndrome. It's a mouthful. The simple thing is these people fall asleep very early in the evening. They cannot stay awake till even 9:30 p.m.
I probably have that.
No, you don't have that because we'll come to the next point. So this was the diagnosis, and that was how the gene was cloned. But then subsequently, what turned out was many of these patients, not all, they also have migraine with aura. And that happens also in the evening. And that begins in the evening, and particularly means this has not been well characterized, but I have seen few patients who have this migraine with aura and also familial advanced sleep phase syndrome. So the point is, once if they have sleep disruption, then it triggers the migraine, and then the migraine remains for a couple of days. So there might be all of these where the sleep phase syndrome is one of the component, but actually the pathology that's affecting performance and daily life is something else. And we still don't know how this mutation in clock gene is affecting migraine.
Oh, fantastic. Uh, so, to follow up with that, what do you think the gold standard? Look, we're doing a lot of work on detection. What would you think is the way that we would detect, somebody's circadian profile or what it is, and how would you do it? I mean, if I had to give somebody that benefit of this knowledge, how would I do that? I mean, how would you think about it for every person as a personalized approach?
Well, the first thing is, as you as you and I were talking, the first thing is, are people getting enough sleep, and is that sleep restorative? And some people, they might think that, hey, all of my life I've been sleeping 5 hours, so it's okay. I've been functional, so they think that they are sleeping enough because they have been getting by, and they might tell, yes, my sleep is perfectly fine. And um, so I guess let's start with sleep and then see whether the ability to fall asleep, so that the sleep latency, how long time it takes you from getting into the bed, switching off all the lights to really falling asleep. Is that good enough? Because that should be roughly in less than 15 minutes from turning off the light, you should fall asleep. And if it is, say, 30 minutes, then you should be a little bit concerned. If it is more than 30 minutes and it happening every day, then you definitely have to seek some help or to see what else you are doing in the day that might be affecting. The second is fragmented sleep. You go to sleep, and then after 3 to 4 hours, you wake up, and it becomes very difficult to fall asleep again. This fragmented sleep, I think, is more prevalent among older adults than yeah. And there are many reasons for that, many behavioral reasons actually. So, for example, people who consume more alcohol in the evening, or those who even eat later into the night, they are more likely to have fragmented sleep. And sleep fragmentation can wreak havoc because your brain is not getting that continuous downtime to repair and restore itself. And then the third one that is not well understood is insufficient sleep. So people might sleep for 7 to 8 hours, and then they get up, they say that they're not getting enough sleep. And this is where it's possible that some people may need even 9 hours of sleep. And this is specifically more important for teenagers and young adults, and more importantly, those who are engaged in sports, because for many young adults, we're asking them get into sports, do some physical exercise, and at the same time they might actually increase their sleep need. And if they're not getting enough sleep, then they're already sleepy and their performance will go down. They might become cranky. All that stuff will happen. So in that way, if we just ask these three simple questions, latency, fragmentation, and sufficiency of sleep, then we can capture a lot of sleep issues. And then another one that we are finding important from many sleep studies is regularity of sleep. Are you going to bed around the same time, plus or minus say 30 minutes? And when people don't go regularly at the same time, that also affects your circadian rhythm, because when we don't go to sleep at the same time, for example, suppose say I go to sleep around say 10 or 11, and then one night I stay awake till midnight or 1 o'clock. So then the question is, what am I doing staying awake till 1 o'clock? I'm not lying in a dark room, I'm exposed to light. And that light exposure for 2 extra hours is enough to reset my clock. So that means for the next 2 days, my clock is out of sync with my own lifestyle. Even though every day I'm eating at the same time and all that stuff, if I'm not sleeping regularly, desynchronizing my clock, so then what happens next day, since it's the brain clock that is being affected and also affects the rest of the clock, at 8 o'clock, although I'm having breakfast every day at 8 o'clock, at 8 o'clock when I'm eating breakfast, my enzymes are not ready enough to digest that food. So in that way, sleep disruption can have effect on your digestion issues, on your gut issues, because those clocks are disturbed. So regular sleep is very important to maintain that brain clock to be in sync. So these are some of the simple things that you can do. And these days, many people are wearing any wearable, and one simple way is to just download that data and then look at it. And you'll be surprised. I'm not sure how is your sleep, but I have seen many doctors, they barely get 5.5 hours of sleep. I mean, I work with at least 3 or 4 MD PhDs in my team, and once in a while we just make fun because they ask me how is my sleep when I travel, and then I say, okay, how is your sleep when you're not in ICU duty? So it's very simple. Just ask them, can you please open your phone or show me your phone, how is your sleep schedule, and you'll capture a lot.
Thank you,
I
Dr.
can I can show you mine.
Look, Manu, we're seeing a trend, and because you talked about this, I'll just bring this up. We're seeing many people get up between 3 and 4. Is it some organ or something else? Especially during that time, it seems to be quite interesting why there are so many people with disturbances around that time. Would you have any rationale for that?
I heard that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we have means there is actually not specific study showing what exactly happens. We know that people are waking up, but then what is triggering, we don't know clearly. So there can be many different things. One thing that happens is when people wake up around 3 o'clock, they're essentially complaining that the bed is too warm and the body may be warm. So one idea is the bed is not cold enough, or the room is not cold enough for them to sustain that sleep. And we, like humans, we have been on this planet for 200,000 years in a cyclic temperature rhythm. But only in the last few decades, after the introduction of air conditioning and heater, we are at a constant temperature. So our body is not experiencing that cyclic temperature. And that cyclic temperature means at night time, our body should experience at least 7 to 8 degree centigrade less temperature than during the daytime. So one hypothesis is maybe a bed is warm, a room is warm, and you can do the experiment. So if you roll over to the other side, if nobody is sleeping on the other side, that it's cooler, and you stick your leg outside your blanket, your leg will also become cooler. And then when your legs are cooler, your core body, your blood flow will go to the leg, to the periphery, and then you might fall asleep. And this is one of the tricks I do sometimes when I'm traveling, when I'm in a different hotels have different beds and all that stuff. So that's one. The second thing that we are surprised, we never anticipated that, was when people do time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, and specifically when they stop eating 3 to 4 hours before their habitual bedtime. And then maybe after 1 or 2 weeks, they maintain that sleep. So they don't wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning. And this also happened to me. So I used to wake up at 3 o'clock and then work on my emails and try to go back to sleep. And now, if I finish my food 3 to 4 hours before bedtime, I can completely go through that. So, but we don't know why is that. We know that it can work for some people, many people, not all, but we don't know why. So that's kind of, and then the third thing that happens, which doesn't happen in India. So in northern latitude, like in Stockholm, in Nordic countries, in winter time when the nights are too long, particularly older adults who are not going clubbing or not seeing their friends and socializing, they have nothing to do. So they will fall asleep around, say, 8 o'clock. And by 3 or 4, they have already gone through 6 hours of sleep. And they wake up because the sleep is light, and then any small disturbances will wake them up. They will wake up, they will stay awake for 1 or 2 hours, they'll go back to sleep. And that's perfectly fine because they have already gotten 6 hours of sleep, 7 hours of sleep before they are waking up at 3. In Stockholm in winter, it can be only 2 hours of daylight or 3 hours of daylight. So it does happen in northern latitude for older people. And since history is typically the old 15th, 16th century history is mostly from Europe, people even have this idea that it's normal to have biphasic sleep. But it's only normal in northern latitude in winter, not for the rest of the world and not for India.
Actually, you touched upon a very interesting topic that even Dr. Arvind and me were discussing recently. It's eating and anything to do with food, which I think is a very important part in India anyway, right? I know that you have this great expertise in time-restricted eating and you've been doing a lot of work. Maybe a couple of words on that just because of, the metabolism and the metabolic issues that we see in our country. Maybe a couple of words on that. And I think one question that we both would love you to answer is what's your take on protein? Because that is the other one that's like, is being freely, I suppose, advertised. But, I would love to hear your take because we've had the same conversation as well.
Yeah, so the concept of time-restricted eating kind of started in 2012. We published a paper. So that's the earliest paper on time-restricted eating. The reason why we called it time-restricted was at that time, the other restriction was calorie restriction. You reduce calorie, you improve health. And in this experiment, we had mice. This was a mouse experiment. And we gave mice very unhealthy food. They could eat whenever they wanted. And then the second group of mice ate the same number of calories from the same food within only 8 hours during nighttime for mice, because mice eat during nighttime. And this 8 hours of feeding actually prevented them from getting diabetes, high body weight, and fat mass, high cholesterol, and all this bad metabolic disease that is known to be connected with unhealthy food. And subsequently, we have done this experiment because the first experiment that we did, 8 hour was just random number because we spend 9 to 10 hours in the lab, so you feed the mice for 8 hours. Unfortunately, that has become kind of the go-to intermittent fasting. People think that you have to eat for 8 hours for intermittent fasting. But in the subsequent studies we have done 9 and 10 hours, they also have similar benefit. So then the question is why this works. I talked to you about how light affects our brain clock. But starting from 2006, 8, 9, around that time, we asked a very simple question. If light is controlling the brain clock and brain clock is controlling all the organ clocks, what happens if mice are fed at the wrong time? What happens to the liver clock? Will the liver clock follow the food cue, or will follow the brain cue, or will it have a split personality, half of them? So then when we did this experiment, we were surprised. What we found was, because that time the prevailing dogma was the brain clock regulates the liver clock. But we were surprised. What we found was the liver clock follows food. And then there are other groups who reproduced our data and also showed it's not only liver, kidney, almost all the peripheral organs, and almost 90% of the brain actually follows the food clock.